Rick, I started looking at the TSP for that project.
And
It's not listed as the Z anymore. So I have to do a little more digging.
yeah, I saw some information from Janet during that scoping meeting that said the project was in the TSP, but not listed on the GO bond. So we're just trying to find out. I'm sorry, folks, we're talking about the Revere rail crossing. And we're just trying to figure out, like, do we scope it for a 3-lane cross section so we can make it a silent crossing and fit in the bike and ped facilities, even if, you know, the whole section doesn't get changed to a 3-lane cross section for a few years. How do we make it forward compatible? Because we know we can't fit in what the city wants on the existing 4-lane cross section without buying a ton of right of way and a few businesses.
Yeah.
Who else were you expecting, Tyler?
I think we can get started. Let me share my screen. All right, you guys seeing just the TAC intro slide?
Yep.
All right, I will call the meeting to order. And I'm just going to go through the list of everybody that I saw come on. If I missed anybody, please speak up at the end. So I've got Jenny Umbarger is here with us. She's helping run the meeting today. Andrea Napoli, Sharon Smith, David Thompson, Robin Lewis, Wendy Holzman, Brian Potwin, Liza Hamada, Rick Williams, Henry Stroud, Cameron Prow, our recorder, Ashley Mohini, and Andrea Brow. Is that everyone? All right. Virtual meeting guidelines. Hopefully everybody's pretty familiar with this stuff at this point in time. I think one of the things that's been added, it's new on our system. I think it's new on our system. There's somewhere on your screen, there's a live transcript option. So you can actually see transcription as the meeting progresses, and you can click that if you want to activate that feature. I believe that's how that works. Agenda item 3, public comment. I know we only have 1 or 2 non-TAC members here with us today. Does anyone have anything they want to share with the group? All right. We'll keep moving then. Meeting minutes, agenda item 4. In your packet was the September 1st, 2021 draft meeting summary. I'm just looking for a motion and a second.
I'll make a motion. I move approval of the September 1st, 2021 draft meeting minutes as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
And was that Dave?
Second.
Okay, thank you.
Tyler, I noticed that it shows me as a non-voting member, and I thought we changed that.
Yes, I believe so. You
So
should be a voting member.
Correction to it. I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor?
I
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? All right, thank you. We'll jump on, keep moving then. Agenda item 5, I'll turn it over to Andrea.
So I'm going to talk about, or a few of us are going to talk about project status updates for the 2021 Surface Transportation Block Grant Fund awards. You can go ahead and move it to the next slide, Tyler. So in December 2020, when the policy board had selected projects to be funded from our STBG project application process, they had asked at that time that annual updates for those funded projects be given. Since funding is awarded by year, those that were awarded the first year of funds available, which are 2021 dollars, have been asked to give the TAC an update on their projects. So we had 3 projects awarded 2021 funds, been Park and Rec District with their Central Oregon Historic Canal Trail project for making safety improvements at roadway crossings. And then Bike Share from the city of Bend was awarded funds a little later, but they were 2021 dollars. And a project between City of Bend and Bend La Pine Schools for the Broster House Road Rail Pedestrian Undercrossing project. And you'll see in red, there's a little note there, those funds were renounced by the City of Bend. And we'll actually, the next agenda item is looking at how we address funds that are unused or returned. So we'll get to that later, but I just simply wanted to make that note that we still wanted to provide the TAC with an update of a project, but they were able to find other funds to fund it. So with that, I will move. I think Henry, your slides are up next for your project. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, and just real quick, Andrea, the second
Sure.
column that says total all years, that's actually our second year award amount. Our total was 64,200.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Thank you for that correction.
Yeah. Sure. You want me just to jump into it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, our project was the Central Oregon Historic Canal Trail Crossing Safety Improvement Project. The goal of this project was to install safety enhancements at 3 road crossings along the trail. We were awarded 64,218 that was spread over 2 fiscal years, so 2021, 2022. And we did that during the application process when we were figuring out, what money was best to be spent in which years. Originally, we had anticipated that we would spend around 26,000 on the first 2 crossings, so at Blakely and Broster House, and then 38,000 on the second crossing in 2022. Like everyone knows, construction's really expensive right now, and the low bid that we actually received for the first phase was $46,000. So we subsequently circled back with the MPO. We requested $20,000 from phase 2 be pushed into 2021. They approved, and we went ahead and issued a contract for construction for the first phase. The construction is going to begin hopefully any day now, and we have an anticipated completion date of November 30th of this year. And then we are still planning on doing phase 2 next year. We are a little short on funding because we don't have the full grant award, but absent of any additional grant allocations, we will pay the balance of the improvements to Ferguson Road out of our CIP. And that has not gone out to bid yet, no firm schedule, but should be completed next year. That's it.
Any questions for Henry? I actually have a question for you, Henry.
Sure.
When you said that you're short on funding for the Ferguson Road portion, I'm curious how much are you short?
We're not sure. So the values that you can see on screen were our original cost estimates when we were scoping this project last year during the grant application phase. Across the board, the bids that we've been getting for construction have been about 30 to 40% higher this year for all of our projects. So we anticipate that number of 38,000 could be substantially larger. How much larger, I'm not sure. But I think we'll probably sharpen our pencils a little bit and try to refine that number at some point here over the winter once we get some room to breathe here.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Henry? No, okay, so the next slides we have are Robin.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So the two awards for Broster House, we didn't end up needing. There was some savings on the Murphy Road project, and we were able to slip the pedestrian undercrossing and path in as part of that. Part of it's under construction right now, and we're anticipating being completed by January. So it's exciting. We're just waiting on one permit from the railroad company. And then the others soon, but they haven't started. We'll start talking with school district for the NEF to 12th path design and the Larkwood and the Northeast 8th Street in a couple of years. So they're still part of the Go Bond project implementation. Yep, so that's the picture of the path. You can see on the left, the rubble fill. We're gonna have that removed and the path, a 10-foot wide path constructed there. The sidewalk leading up to it on each side is completed. So we're just waiting on that permit from Burlington Northern, and we'll be able to get that in. The contractor has already been awarded. And so they're just waiting on the permit. Yeah, so you can see the blue is all the sidewalks that were constructed as part of the Murphy Road project. You can see the railroad down there, and the red dot is where that undercrossing is, and sidewalk to connect to that has been constructed. So we're just waiting on getting that one last piece in, and it should just take us a little bit once that contract kicks in with the permit. Any questions? Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Robin. So, I am realizing that Toby was going to give a verbal update about bike share, but I don't see him here. And not to put anybody on the spot, but I know I do see Casey. Casey, do you have any update on bike share? I know that in the past, Toby was having some issues with getting certain, there was a shortage for the chips that they needed for the bike share. But I don't know of any other updates.
Tell you what I know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that is true. Basically, we would have to upgrade the controllers on the 100 bikes that were donated to Bend from the Nike Bike Town program out of Portland. And that company kept bumping out their date for delivery of those. And the last update we got was that it would be fall of 2022. And so now Toby's just trying to get a little bit creative and saying, maybe there's a better bike share partner that can help us launch earlier in spring of 2022. So that's the goal. And again, it could be a different partner. It could be, I think some of you may have heard of Cascadia Mobility, which is a partner that's operating Eugene's bike share program. And they're looking to kind of expand throughout Oregon and offer kind of a nonprofit management of bike share for smaller cities in Oregon. So hoping to continue to work with Cascadia Mobility, but looking for a better technology partner. Any other questions that I may or may not know an answer to?
Okay, well, thanks, Casey.
Thanks.
All right, Andre. Andre, do you want to jump to the next agenda item then?
Yeah, so the next agenda item kind of, relates to what we are just talking about, but we need to work on developing policy as far as how we address our unused or returned STBG awards. You can move to the next slide, Tyler. So we don't currently have a process or guidance on how we address unused or renounced awarded funds that have been awarded during our competitive STBG project application process. And either the full amount wasn't used for the project or the award was renounced altogether. I don't think we want it to be as simple as, well, they go back into the pot for the next round, because it is very important that we get these funds spent. So that said, I took some policy language from other MPOs and tweaked it a bit for us, and included it as a memo in your agenda packet. And, as much as I don't like filling slides with text, it is fairly short. So I'm hoping that we can work through it as a group and come to consensus on it, and then be able to give a recommendation to the policy board on what language the TAC would like to see here. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide. So the draft language has 4 sections total. So this is the bulk of it, aside from the little highlight you see there about substitute projects. There's one more slide that discusses the possibility of offering a substitute project. So the first 2 are pretty, I think, standard, but still should be included here. So I'm going to go ahead and go over each one of these main ones and see if there's anything that the TAC would like to see added, deleted, anything we might be missing. And then, of course, keep in mind that the next slide we will get to will address the substitute project. So number 1, Bend MPO Policy Board makes all final decisions regarding STBG application process awards. I think that's a given. And then number 2, all awards are specific to a project and must be spent on that project. Any questions so far or comments? Okay, the third one, funds that are not used on the project for which they were allocated will be addressed as follows. So A, when funds are not fully expended, unused funds go back to the MPO for reallocation. This kind of keeps it open as to, if the board would like to see those dollars go back for the next round, or if there is a project that might need more funds, they could go to that. It basically keeps it open for the MPO to use those funds as they think are needed. And then the second item there, when an applicant determines it will not implement a project or the award is no longer needed for that project, it may offer a substitute project. And we'll get to that on the next slide, but I would like to get to number 4 before that. So the fourth one, priority for available funds related to the STBG application process will be given to projects that have gone through the MPO's application process and need additional funds for completion. I do think that we might want to think about adding in language for those projects that would like to request advancement of their award. So for example, if you have a project that was awarded $2024, but it's ready to go now, you could then ask that your project be advanced for those available $2021. I see, Dave, I see your hand up.
Yeah, question on 4 then. Would that just be projects that were allocated money, or would that include projects that applied but didn't receive any funds in the previous round?
You know what, I think, and I can make that more, I can clarify that, but that would apply to projects that went through the process but weren't necessarily awarded funds. So for example, that would be bike share wasn't originally awarded funds, but later it was, and it had gone through the whole application process. So it would be those that had gone through the application process, but what weren't necessarily awarded funds. They could still be eligible for priority for available funds. That was my intention anyhow.
Okay. Thanks.
Sharon, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, the question on that, what about a project that went through the process, wasn't funded, and the consensus was that it wasn't a good project or scored very low? Would it still get priority? I mean, does the availability of funds kind of make it go from a not a good project to, okay, we're going to fund it anyway?
Well, I think so that priority for available funds, you would still have, it would still be up to the policy board to decide whether that project was funded. So it would take the original scoring that it had gotten from the application process, and then it would be up to the board to decide whether they wanted to fund it or not. It would simply be that they would have priority before another application would be submitted for another project.
Yeah, I think the way it's worded kind of maybe gives it bonus points.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a way to clarify that. It's not.
If it were priority for available funds for projects funded that had
I'm not sure how best to wordsmith it like right in the moment, but you see what I'm getting at is like, are we saying that, well, if you went through the process, you're going to get priority, or what we're trying to get at is if you went through the process, you'll be on the list, but will be rescored maybe with the substitute projects. Is that what you're thinking? Is that they don't?
Well, the substitute project is a different one that's under number 3, but the 4th one is talking about priority for those that have already gone through review. But if we wanted it to be maybe this one.
I have a question that is, I think, directly related to what Sharon's asking. Is if there are additional funds, are they going to be awarded on a rolling basis, or is there going to be like an application date and people may reapply for additional funds? Because if it's the latter and there's a firm application date, then I think we can evaluate awarded projects versus projects that weren't awarded, and that can all be factored in.
I think
it could be part of the criteria essentially.
Right. So we would like to keep our application period to be on the cycle that it is, and not do an additional solicitation if possible, just because it does take, there's a lot of staff time involved for that. So the intent with this 4th one is to use those applicants that have already gone through their original application process and have already been reviewed. Whether or not they had been awarded funds or not, maybe that might be what needs to be added in here.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, I think that and obviously the process is up to you guys, but if you had, a certain time period where everyone who had been previously awarded or previously applied could apply for additional funds, then you could evaluate all those at once. And presumably the policy board's going to want to look at these all at once. And maybe that's not the intent, but.
Yeah, I would say that for, the last little bit here, and need additional funds for completion. And I could clarify that, they have already been awarded funds, but they need additional funds to, for example, Henry, your project that has already been awarded funds, and then you find out that actually it's going to cost this much, then you would be given priority for those available funds. Sharon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think we don't want to create a situation where we just ran out of money, but there were great projects. So maybe if we just added a sentence after that saying, these projects will be considered based on their original scoring or something like that, so that it is clear that additional review will go into it, and they aren't going to have absolute priority.
Okay, and then I think also adding, what do you think about adding some clarity around the need additional funding for completion, as in they've already been awarded funding?
So do we want to just say first priority would be projects that were awarded funding but have a shortfall? Second priority.
Shortfall, yes.
Yeah, second priority would be projects that weren't originally awarded funding, but based on their rank, their ranking. So presumably, be one of the top ones, but based on the amount of money, it might not be the top one because it might need way too much or something.
Gotcha. Robin?
And on 3B, it sounds like projects that didn't apply previously.
No, that's not what that, okay. So I'll clarify that. That would certainly be one that had applied previously and is looking for a substitute project. So first question, I guess, to the group is what Dave had mentioned, that essentially there'd be two categories in that number 4, that priority would, 1, be given to those that are experiencing a shortfall, and then 2, those that were not awarded but went through the scoring to be considered for available funds. Any comments on revising it to that language? And I can, we don't have to finalize this today. I can revise it, send it back out to the group for comment too. Robin, is your hand up from?
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems like in 3B, the MPO would rather have, retain the right to reallocate the funds, as opposed to the project that didn't go through or didn't use the funds. It sounds like that applicant then can choose the next project, as opposed to the funds go back into the pool and the MPO works together, all members, and selects the next.
So wait, say that again. So for the third one, that is where funds not used on the project for which they were allocated will be addressed as follows. Either they go back to the MPO or they consider a substitute project.
Yeah, so the applicant and the awardee sounds like they get to pick the next project, as opposed to the funds go back to the MPO and then the MPO has that power.
So the awardee would, if they had a substitute project, they could submit that substitute project.
But it would have to have been a substitute project that was already scored and voted on, right?
No. So we want to, Tyler, can you move to the next slide? Because I think this will answer that question.
Okay.
So the substitute projects will be evaluated according to current Bend MPO evaluation criteria. And then the board will decide whether the funds should go to that substitute project or go back to the MPO.
So a new project that wasn't scored before.
Correct.
Okay.
Karen?
So in this scenario, the substitute project, would that process happen before the process on the previous slide, the last?
Right, it would be a one, you know, someone submits a substitute project. It wouldn't be a call for projects. It would simply be the single substitute project for those dollars that were originally awarded, but the project didn't need the funds or didn't go forward.
I guess I'm asking timing questions. So, for example, in the Broster House, the undercrossing, that wasn't needed. In this scenario, the city could propose a substitute project. The Bend Policy Board would consider it and decide, yes, we like that, or no, we don't. We're going to put the funds back into the pot. And then the next step is, on the previous slide, you go back, item 4. So 3B happens first and then 4.
Right.
Okay.
And you know what, your comment made me think that there should probably be a time frame of when you can submit a substitute project. So whether that be, you know, I don't know, 60 days. Any ideas on, I definitely think we should have a time frame in there.
Is the thinking behind that an applicant, we're encouraging folks to, if they don't need the money to, you know, they have funding somewhere else, but we still want them to have some kind of priority to do something else with the money? I'm trying to understand the policy reason for the substitution.
Well, I mean, it's really driven by the fact that we still need to get the funds spent. We can't, you know, we're awarded funding by year. And although I don't think Tyler could answer this, I don't think FHWA has ever, you know, taken funds away from us because we haven't spent them, but they can. So our priority is always to get dollars spent, and the substitute project and, you know, priority for available funds from projects that have already been funded is a way to do that, rather than to simply, you know, put the money back in the pot for the next application process.
Yeah, I guess my thought is, it feels like the substitute project should be given the same consideration as item 4. So it all goes back into the pool rather than kind of a 2-step process, because then you're delaying things even more.
Okay.
That's my thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't understand why we would give a substitute project a higher priority than say that, you know, the next top rated project from the previous evaluation, which would kind of come up in number 4. It seems like we should do number 4 first. And if we don't have, if the policy board doesn't feel that any of those projects are worth funding at that point, then maybe ask for a substitute project. But I don't know why we'd put a substitute project above projects we already ranked as being deserving, but just didn't have enough money to fund at the time.
Okay.
Does that
So
make sense?
I understand what you're saying. So essentially move that number 4 as 3B, that, you know, funds not used on a project for which they will be allocated will be addressed as follows, that those funds would be given priority to projects that have already gone through the process and awarded funds and need additional funding for completion. And then secondarily, that there could be the option for substitute projects.
Yeah, so we had broken 4 up into 2, right? Additional funds to complete a project already awarded, a new project that we didn't allocate money to the first time around, and then third would be if neither of those are available to spend the money, then we look at a substitute project.
Sure. I can, Sharon?
Yeah, just thinking about it in terms of our goals. Our goal is to get the money spent.
Correct.
And we could have a situation where a substitute project is something that's really needed, but it just wasn't on the radar when the process happened. And so it almost seems like it might make sense to do them together. It's like, okay, we're going to do one round. Let's, if there's a substitute project, put it in the pool, it'll get ranked. We'll look at all the rest of them. The policy board will look at all the rest of them and then make a decision. So we don't have to do, item 4 and then turn around and do item 3B, because that's going to cause delay. That's just my thought.
So what are thoughts on combining shortfall of projects already awarded funds, substitute projects, and projects that went through the application process, but for whatever reason were not awarded funding?
I think it makes sense to consider them all together.
Any objection to that? Or any thoughts otherwise?
My only thought is if a substitute project is a slight variation, so say, I don't know, Robin's undercrossing project changed slightly, does that bypass this additional review because it's effectively the same intended goal?
I think that would be, certainly that would still fall under this, category of either of us. It could still fall under a substitute project. It doesn't have to be the same. It could certainly be
Yeah.
a different project.
I guess I'm also thinking, like, do the MPO staff have, maybe you guys have some flexibility to say, well, this is the same project, just, I don't know, repackaged somehow. You could take bike share, for example, right? If Toby comes back and says, well, we're not going to use it for the specific reason, but it's still going to be to launch bike share. And as long as it meets MPO, fund requirements, can you just keep that in?
Okay. All right, well, I think I have enough to make some revisions rather than the TAC, making a recommendation on this language now. I'd rather revise this a bit based on comments, send it back out to the TAC, and then go from there. If that works for everyone. Okay.
Anything else, Andrea?
No, I'm unless anyone else has any other comments, that's what I'll plan on doing. I'll revise it based on comments, send it back out to the TAC and ask for comments on the revised policy language by a certain date.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. On to agenda item 7, I'm just going to give a brief update on some of the safety planning work that we've done. I'm going to kind of gloss through a few of these slides pretty quickly because I have another presentation that I would like to try and squeeze in towards the end of the meeting if we have time. So just a little bit of background. I think hopefully everyone's aware that we had received a grant from ODOT to help implement some of the non-infrastructure pieces of the Transportation Safety Action Plans that were developed for both Bend and Deschutes County. And the work that we were going to do under that was to create a regional safety committee, create a safety communications plan and a calendar, and then host a campaign and a safety summit on transportation safety. We've made decent progress on those things for that first grant, but we are going to continue working. We received some additional funding from ODOT to continue work on those items. And so that regional safety committee we just got buy-in last week to have that committee formed under COACT. And so we're just starting now to kind of scope what that's going to look like. We want to expand, or we want to refine the safety communications plan and calendar work that was put together under the first grant. And we want to expand our work to cover all of Central Oregon. We think that the safety issues are pretty similar throughout the region, and messaging and communication platforms, we can reach everybody within Central Oregon with the same kind of messaging that we think we want to do. The other thing we want to do under this current grant that we just received is to be able to keep this effort moving forward. We're going to need some sort of long-term funding strategy. ODOT has given us funding 2 years, and they may give us a little bit of additional funding for 1 or 2 more years, but then that will taper off. And we would like to be able to keep working on a safety messaging and communication effort for Central Oregon. So we'll be working on trying to figure out how to make that happen. And then we may possibly host a second transportation safety summit next year. I'm going to skip this slide. And just a little bit of background. I think we showed this to you before, but the reason that there's kind of the push, a big push on safety is if you look at this chart, that orange line shows the number of traffic fatalities by year in Deschutes County. And our numbers mimic or are pretty similar to those throughout Oregon and nationally, and that there's been a significant uptick in the number of fatalities in the last 2 years. And I think 2021 is probably on track to either meet or exceed those 2020 numbers. So it's not good. And I'm not going to walk through these slides, but we pulled together during our Transportation Safety Summit last month, or actually in September. We pulled together data from Deschutes, Jefferson, and Crook counties. And while there's some variation among the counties, underlying the issues are the same. It's just some are a little more intense or a little more, have higher numbers than others, but the numbers are pretty similar. And this shows the same thing as well. It's just showing some of the data in terms of the types of crashes that have been recorded over the last 4 to 5 years within those 3 counties. I think we had a few folks might have been on the safety summit that we had. We had a pretty good turnout for that. We had about 60 people in attendance. I think the thing we were most happy with is that we had a lot of our higher powered elected officials in attendance during that summit. So we had the mayors of Bend and Redmond, we had the chair of the Deschutes County Commission, we had the COACT chair and a couple of other COACT members. We had city council members from Bend, other members from Bend, LaPine and Sisters. And then we had Crook County Commissioner on the call. And then we had folks from Jefferson County as well. And so I think we were pretty happy with that. And I think we got pretty good feedback about that event. As part of that, or leading up to that safety summit, we had a very simple online survey that was open for the month of September. We had about 1,900 people take that short survey. This slide just shows a little bit of information about it. About 80% were from Bend. We were hoping to get a little bit broader regional representation because we pushed it out to the Crook, Jefferson, and Deschutes counties. But I think it got pushed through a number of social media platforms pretty heavily locally. And so we have pretty high turnout or participation from Bend residents. Transportation safety, unsurprisingly, is a pretty high priority. That's identified as a high priority by 85% of those who took the survey. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is of those 1,900 participants, 1,500 submitted comments. And we still haven't sorted through all of those comments yet, but we've done a little bit of grouping of those comments. And I think the biggest one, or the one that received the most comments, was just the desire for more enforcement, really around speeding being the biggest one that we heard. More enforcement for impaired driving. And I think at least in Bend, that's happening now. The city of Bend has recently hired, I think within the last 6 months, a couple of additional police officers that are heavily focused on impaired enforcement, and those numbers, I don't know if anybody's seen, but in the media, the number of people that have been arrested for impaired driving has gone up significantly this year. Dave, you have a question?
More of a comment, and you addressed a little bit of it there, but it just continues to frustrate me to no end that we have a transportation safety program that's fairly comprehensive, but does not formally include law enforcement. And I understand that, you know, law enforcement doesn't report through the same channels as the transportation planning pieces, but you know, it's just frustrating that we can't have a discussion about education versus enforcement and what's the right balance. And you know, if we could spend money on enforcement, maybe we could spend less money somewhere else. You know, you just can't have that discussion. It just frustrates the heck out of me.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Dave. And I think that there's a lot of us that have been, you know, working in this arena share the same frustration. And we think that, you know, anecdotally, you know, my opinion is that there would be that because enforcement has either the number of police officers we have dedicated to enforcement is lower today, I believe, than it was, you know, say 10 or 15 years ago. And yet our population's grown significantly during that time. Tourist volumes have grown significantly during that time. And so, you know, I think there's a perception that there's very little enforcement on the street, and people in cars, especially, drive accordingly. You know, they know they can speed because they are not going, the chances of getting pulled over are exceedingly slim. So, and Robin, do you have anything to add on just that issue or that topic?
We went to a webinar yesterday on automated speed enforcement with police department. So it was interesting. It's tough to get public buy-in is one of the main takeaways I took from that webinar. I think it could be a strong component within our program, but it really has to be part of and tied to safety and locations that have crashes in order to get community buy-in. So I think it's definitely something we can put in the mix, but it's not as easy as it seems.
No, and I think we've also heard as part of these discussions on enforcement, particularly around speeding, there's at least a handful of folks that are being very, very vocal about wanting the city to move towards more automated enforcement. And that automated enforcement is heavily regulated by the state, meaning either state statute or administrative rules. And what we can and cannot do is lined out in excruciating detail in state statute. And so if we want to move in that direction, we will have to work with our state legislators to get changes made to state law to allow that to be, I think, a viable option in the future. So anyway, just other things. Infrastructure was brought up by a lot of folks. Public education was out there as another big topic area. And then there was just kind of this other group of suggestions, and that included better public transportation. And there was quite a few comments too, just about managing speed through better road design. And I think that's something that the city's already doing, but that's a long-term proposition in terms of particularly retrofitting existing roadways.
Hey Tyler, I have a question about the automated speed detection. So are there other MPOs or other agencies that would like to do the same thing, where it could be, a group effort rather than, I'm sure that Bend isn't the only one.
No, for sure. I mean, it's been an issue. It's been identified as a desire, I think, throughout the state. And I think where we've seen the biggest progress is the city of Portland has pushed really, really hard over the last, 4, 5, 6 state legislative sessions. And they have gotten modifications made to state law that are specific to the city of Portland. And so you now will see they probably have 5 or 6 at least locations where they have permanent automated enforcement camera systems in place. And it's tied to safety and a number of other things. And I think if we got other cities or regions that are interested in the same thing, it'd be worthwhile for us to look and see what Portland's done, and have kind of a group voice around starting to see changes similar to what they've been able to get, and allow those on at least a limited basis outside of the Portland area.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep. Any questions so far? Other questions? All right, so I just have a couple of slides here or one slide on what we're going to be doing with COACT. And so as mentioned, we met with COACT last week and got their blessing to form this regional safety committee under them. We think it's going to be we want it to be a subcommittee, a fairly small group. We're thinking probably 7 to 8 members of COACT that would be on that group. And so we're going to be meeting with them hopefully in early to mid-December to get started on that. And just doing some of the things I've already mentioned, in terms of refining those communication plans, reviewing some of the crash data summaries, providing us some direction on outreach tools and opportunities, and then working on that funding strategy. Like I said, we'll be going to them, working with that subcommittee in December, and then going back to the full COACT at their probably first or second meeting in 2022. Any questions? I think this is my last slide. All right. So I'm going to jump into the round table, and I'm going to let Ashley have you go first, just because you have quite a few slides. And I'll let you jump in to provide an update on CET's electric technology feasibility study.
Thanks, Tyler. And I may have been a little ambitious with the number of slides I put in here. So what was the timing, Tyler? It's about 10 to 15, or how long do I have? Oops, sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, you've got 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hi. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Ashley Money. I'm the Strategic Programs and Partnerships Coordinator for Cascades East Transit. And I wanted to give you a quick overview and then of the overall project that we're working on with this electric technology feasibility study. And I also wanted to give you a quick look at the results from our operational review. This is kind of the first deliverable that we've received from the consultants, and I would argue maybe the most important. So I'm excited to share with you some of the data that we've received. If you want to go to the next slide. So CET's electric technology feasibility study will provide us with a strategic roadmap that will inform future planning efforts surrounding electric technology. This study, as Tyler mentioned, was funded by Pacific Power, and it is a critical first step for us towards accomplishing the community climate action goals, and also just generally transitioning away from fossil fuels. CET's feasibility study will provide insight into the following areas. It will have an operational review, which I'll share some of that data with you today, which basically will recommend which routes would be appropriate for battery electric buses, and that could operate efficiently within our system, as well as understand the potential service changes that we could make to transition those non-feasible or unfeasible routes to feasible. And a big kind of key metric there is going to be reducing the number of service miles that our vehicles travel in a day. But I'll tell you more about that in a minute. The next piece will be to recommend facilities and equipment. So understanding exactly what sort of charging infrastructure will be needed to support our future electric fleet. A look into fleet and maintenance. The electric vehicle industry is evolving really quickly, and our consultant team will help us to understand the operational reliability and maintenance requirements among those various manufacturers. The study will also look into a financial and economic analysis, and this is going to highlight some of those key public as well as private funding opportunities. And CTE, who a big piece of their service offering to their clients is that they not only, kind of help with the feasibility piece and also the implementation plan, which comes after kind of doing that initial feasibility study, but they also a big piece of their service offering is to actually help write and apply for some of these really big and complicated grants like Low-No federal grants. They'll also make a recommendation on the most cost-effective procurement model for our agency. So there's the traditional independent ownership as well as energy as a service. So looking more at the leasing option, and given the really quick nature of this industry, the leasing option is definitely something that we're interested in learning more about. And then the last piece will be to recommend an overall electric grid system, the overall electric grid system improvements that would be necessary to support a large user like a transit agency. I do think that the key here for the future success of electric technology transition for our community is going to be that key community collaboration. And so that's why from the very get-go, we included key community partners into this conversation. And if you want to go ahead to the next slide, Tyler. So CTE is the consulting team that we're working with. They're a nonprofit engineering and planning firm. One thing that we found really just fascinating about the work that they do is that they've worked with a lot of different agencies to help them transition to zero emissions. And they also have worked with tons of clients across the entire US, ranging from really large metropolitan areas to smaller rural clients, which was one of the reasons why we really appreciated the work that they were doing. They also are working with the city of working in Corvallis with the transit agency there. So they're very familiar with the state of Oregon and with our neighbors and how they're transitioning to zero emissions. Next slide. I just threw this in here as something to kind of give CET a kind of thumbs up that we received from CTE, the consulting firm. We're really impressed with us that we wanted to include our community partners so early, as well as the utility. We're having conversations with Pacific Power now, and because we're so early in the process, this really sets us up for success. And so just wanted to kind of underscore that community collaboration piece and the importance in the future success of this kind of transition. Next slide. All right, sorry, next slide. So these are the different, and actually I think I may have pulled out a slide here, so I'll just quickly go over the process. So the process that we went through to get this operational review together was going through a painstaking data collection process. And so we started just combing through all of our services, and we organized our services by blocks. And this is, I'd never heard this term used before, but this is the way that CTE really kind of bases all of their data and recommendations. It's basically a day in the life of the bus, which makes complete sense, right? A vehicle can traverse multiple different routes in a day, but at the end of the day, what matters is what that bus is able to get in a depot charge overnight, and then being able to figure out how much energy is necessary for that bus to be able to operate and get back to the depot that evening. So blocks were a really important piece of the data collection here. And we'll talk a little bit more about like what our routes look like now and what things can be changed to make them feasible. But CTE uses a lot of their previous data that was collected from other projects to then set these performance parameters. And also use that then to cross-check the data that we provided them to see, basically provide best practices on the data that we provided. What I just said actually doesn't make a ton of sense. They established the performance parameters and assumptions given the vehicle types that we utilize and the operating environment that we're operating in. So key there would be like the weather, strenuous versus non-strenuous. And they're then able to determine the feasibility of those routes based on energy needed, as I mentioned earlier, to go over the full block distance. On top of that, the energy needed to operate the auxiliary system, so HVAC, which I didn't realize until we started working on this, takes up a ton of energy. And then also the duration, like the time that the vehicle on that block is actually operating it. And then they cross-check that with the actual battery that is available, the battery power that's available on the vehicle. So the 4 different pieces here that they looked at were the overnight charging. So that would just be the vehicle goes, charges up overnight, and then goes to do the route during the day. The other piece is the midday depot charge along with overnight. So they're able, throughout in the middle of the day, able to go and get a charge at the depot. And just for clarification, the depot here would be either our Redmond maintenance facility, or it would be our Bend maintenance facility, which is located off Bear Creek. And then the next piece they looked at was looking at the midday charging opportunity. I'm sorry. Apologies, dog was going wild. So midday charging opportunity with the diesel heater. Obviously, diesel heater is not exactly what we want to move towards as far as, that is using fossil fuels. But an interesting piece was that it was a cheaper option that did move some of our unfeasible routes to feasible. So something to consider, but also somebody in a previous meeting had mentioned maybe biofuel as another option. So something that we're looking into. And the last is on route charging, which obviously that will involve adding additional infrastructure beyond the depot. Next slide, please. So here is a look at the feasibility results. And I know this is very disappointing because there's a lot that's in red. The main reason here, though, that a lot of these routes are in red is because they go way over the allocated service miles that would be able to be captured through a basically 120 is what you want to look at as far as service miles that are capable for a vehicle. And because of the hub and spoke model of our Bend fixed routes, where the routes go all the way out and then come in, as well as the long distances for our regional routes, many of these routes were not feasible across the board for Bend fixed routes. And then you can see here when things look a little bit more promising as far as the coloring, when we add in these other charging opportunities, some of those routes are able to transition from unfeasible to feasible. We can run to the next slide. Okay, so one of the really fascinating things here, and I've taken a lot of time to look at these next 2 slides. One thing that's really interesting is, so you'll see on the left, it has duration in hours. And so this is the number, the amount of time that our vehicles would need to charge up midday to be able to meet the needs of their routes. This can be broken up. So it could be, take, for example, that first block, Monday through Friday, Route 4. So this is our weekday Route 4 route. For this service, it would need an hour of midday charging to be able to meet the needs of its route. But that could be broken up in 15 minutes. It could be 2 30-minute routes, multiple 10-minute routes. There's just a lot of different ways that we can break that up, which provides us with a lot of flexibility. And then you'll also see between weekday Route 4 and then Saturday Route 4, which covers, it's an interline route with 2 and 4, that Saturday route needs less, would need less charging time. And, but it has slightly more service miles to the left. And part of the reason for that is the duration, the time of the block. So the service miles matter, but also the duration time of the block matters as well, because that's time that the HVAC system is in operation, and that's going to whittle down the charge for the battery a lot as well. Next slide, because I know I'm running out of time. So this one looks at the diesel heat. So I basically had two slides. One looks at looking at just having that midday depot charge, and then this one looks at the having that diesel heat on there as well, which obviously you'll see that a lot of the charging times are a lot lesser there because the HVAC system isn't sucking the power from the battery as much. Next slide, please. So I think really the key kind of takeaway here for this entire first operational review is that although a lot of our routes right now are not feasible, we're at this really amazing kind of nexus, this kind of great transformational moment for us as an agency, where by implementing these mobility hubs into our system, we are already planning to reroute a lot of the routes that we have and moving away from this hub and spoke model, which clearly doesn't allow for the feasibility of a lot of electric vehicle options. And so I think that because we have this information in hand now, it provides us with a really great opportunity with this replanning to make sure that the routes that we're providing, meet some of those key criteria from the get-go, so that we can, look into making that transition more larger transition as an agency. Yeah, I know that I just muttered on a lot, and my apologies, I'm feeling a little under the weather, but I did want to see if there are any questions that anyone from the group has. This is part of a very large, slide deck that the consultants provided me that provides a lot more background. I'm not sure if anybody would be interested in looking at that, but I'd be more than happy to turn it into a PDF and share it with the group if there's interest.
Actually, I guess just a question, is this project or this feasibility study done, number one, and then number two, what's the next step or steps in the process?
Yes, so it is not finished. We are now moving into the facilities deliverable. And so I got my first, it's like the partner involvement best practices memo from them, and I'm reviewing that right now. We'll be reviewing the operational review. It won't be finished until probably the end of January, beginning of February. But the next steps here will be, once we have this in hand, this essentially gives us like an evaluation of where we stand as we stand right now. But as we all know, there's a lot of changes that are going to be coming down the pipe. And so the next step for us then will be to get an implementation plan together. And that implementation plan will provide that detail that we need to actually move forward with procurement. And I would say that one of the big things that I've learned from talking to other agencies has been that the most important thing, this is a huge investment. A fleet is a huge investment for any agency as it stands, but the increased cost of the investment into these alternative fuel vehicles is so great that we can't afford to get it wrong. And so that implementation plan would give us the extra help of experts that are in that space, like CTE or another firm perhaps, but to get that detail in hand so that we can move forward with procuring a vehicle. So that would be the next step after this is completed.
Thank you. All right, any other comments or questions for Ashley? All right, I'll jump back.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Sharon, you want to give a quick update on the facilities planning process?
Sure. We're just launching the 5-year update to the Bama Pine Schools 20-year sites and facilities plan. We have 2 subcommittees of a group of folks that include staff as well as community members. And we are in the process of looking at 2 things. One is existing facility needs and prioritizing those needs in a plan. Things like maintenance, upgrades, safety, those types of facility needs. And then the second subcommittee is focused on projected future needs for schools, additional schools. And we are relying on the Portland State University analysis to determine growth and where the growth is happening, working closely with the city of Bend. Damian Cernick is on the committee and looking at existing developments that have been approved as well as things that are planned for the future. We're a little behind because PSU is a little behind in their analysis. So our goal is to have the report completed in the spring of 22, and then that would then inform the board, and the board would consider whether or not to go out for a bond for funding for facility improvements and potential new capacity, new schools. COVID really has impacted our enrollment negatively. So despite the last 30 years trends of annual growth, steady annual growth, we've seen a decline in enrollment since the pandemic began. So we're in kind of a weird spot because the growth projections are pretty uncertain and not necessarily reliable because of the pandemic. So it's a little more challenging this go around than it has been, but we're going to work through the data and come up with our best prediction of what's going to happen in the next 5 years. That's a short summary, and happy to answer any questions.
I have a question, Sharon. In terms of kind of that population growth information that you've gotten or will be getting from PSU, and then kind of sorting through that, are you going to have some initial ideas or recommendations? I mean, I guess what's your schedule in terms of starting to see some draft recommendations come out, particularly in terms of longer term growth?
We're still waiting. We were hoping to have it by this month from PSU, but it may slip. So we just really don't know when they're going to be able to get that to us.
Okay.
We're hopeful we'll have it by the end of November, but we just don't need it. And,
all right.
I'll happy to keep this group updated as things progress.
Great. Thank you. All right, I will jump and let Henry give us an update on Parks and Rec projects.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. So just a quick update on some projects that we have under construction. We just reached substantial completion on the resurfacing of the Hall Road Trail. So I think we're doing our final site walk with the contractor this week. So that trail is now paved all the way from Whitewater Park to the National Forest Welcome Center. So that was a really big endeavor, multi-year endeavor that we're very happy to be wrapping up. We also are under construction for an extension of a trail along Butler Market Road. And this ties into some trail work that was recently done by the city. So now there will be a continuous multi-use path along Butler Market in between, I believe it's Brenton and the new roundabout at Purcell. And this is part of the larger effort for trail development along the North Unit Canal that the city and the Park District have been working on. Other than that, we are continuing work at Alpenglow Park. So this is our new 40-acre park in Southeast Bend. We are on track for completion in spring of next year. So if you haven't been out there, it's worth a visit, and that site's coming along really, really well. And then finally, next week, we are starting construction on improvements to Big Sky Park. And this involves a lot of new infrastructure, parking lots, different facilities that are being put in out there, as well as the first stage of our bicycle kind of destination park. So I think in this first phase, we're putting in a pump track and then some of the infrastructure for the additional bike jumps and cyclocross course and other stuff that are going in the future. So yeah, lots happening. We're in this really cool construction phase right now where I think all our planning's paid off and we're finally getting to see some stuff put in. So.
Henry, this is Dave Thompson. Quick question. So I was actually writing the new Hall Trail pavement, and it's really nice. You know, you're still working on some of the some of the sidewalk connections. But I did notice that in the section west of Mammoth Drive, there was some pretty bad rippling in the brand new asphalt. I don't know if you guys maybe have already picked that up and talked to the contractor about it, but it was, you know, even on my wide tires, fairly low inflation, it was sort of like corrugated.
Yeah, you know, Dave, I haven't been out there since they paved that section. I'll pass that on to the project manager though. And thank you. I really appreciate that. That's good information. I know they're kind of creating their punch list right now for the contractor. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Henry, I have a question. What's the, for those, the Big Sky improvements, the bike facilities, what's the expected completion for construction for that? I'm curious.
So for all of the improvements, I'm not sure what the expected completion is. I know for this first phase, they're looking at completion by the end of next year. Bronwyn, who's the project manager, told me late fall 2022, but I think just to be safe, probably end of 2022 would be the pump track and some of this first initial infrastructure that's going in to support the future development of the park.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Thank you, Henry. Casey?
Yeah. I don't know if I can do a quick screen share. Can I just take over?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm working with the city. I guess I have other updates, but this is kind of the most pertinent, I thought, to this group, to develop kind of a new mobility framework. So in, you know, the transportation world, we're, you know, seeing a lot of other cities develop new mobility playbooks, or you could call it any term you want, but Seattle and other cities have done this, where they're basically trying to account for the new advancements in technology and how public-private partnerships play into meeting the needs of the community. So I'm working with Toby and I guess David Abbas as well within the new mobility and transportation department at the city. And this kind of got kicked off with this idea of relaunching bike share, because without a good, well, we could have bike share, but bike share is just a real small piece within kind of what a new mobility I don't know, services could look like within Bend. So here's my kind of quick vision of, you know, again, kind of tying in technology, services, and public-private partnerships together. And then goals of that would be, maybe it's helpful to make it bigger. Is that better? Okay, let's keep going.
Looks like there's a pop-up on it. There you go.
I don't know if it's easier to go through the presentation mode or if I just, no, this will work. So again, some of those goals, you know, start engaging partners in the community. I mean, some of you guys on this call, but, you know, in particular, I think of the MPO, I think of Cascades East Transit and Bend Parks, because you guys are developing a great trail network. You know, some of these devices that could be coming to Bend would be operating on those trails. So of course, including you guys as a key stakeholder would be great. But anyway, goals would be, you know, look at what these existing and future mobility services look like, and you know, what they could become in the next 5 to 10 years. Identify needs that could be addressed by those. So, you know, I think of first and last mile services, connections to transit is kind of a big one right now, but it could be downtown parking, could be just access to jobs, equitable access to jobs, and then collaborating with partners. So I think this is going to be a big piece of this effort, is really kind of creating what I might call like a new mobility work group. So again, who is it from Bend Parks and Rec that wants to be involved in seeing how these new services might play out on Parks property, and we could get that person engaged and kind of regularly checking in with that group. Again, CET, MPO, but also maybe engaging I mentioned Cascadia Mobility, they're operating bike share and other services in Eugene. So it could be a great resource for us here. And then basically saying, okay, out of new mobility opportunities, what projects rise to the top, and could we start testing in the short term? Again, bike share is great, but so let's say scooter share, and we call it dockless mobility, but a lot of shared scooter networks don't require that they return a scooter to a station. So allowing scooters to be parked at any public rack within and Parks and Rec property, for example. So all these things that are kind of hot topics, just want to kind of get that collaboration and conversation going and start ultimately ending with some policy recommendations and updates to the city that would allow some of these services to come in and be implemented. Last slide from me is just on these kind of some of these topics. I mentioned micromobility, access to jobs, single occupancy and shared ride hail. Again, it's more of a, let's look at how that's been operating in Bend, what's working, what's not, and how we can improve that to make, and I guess reduce the number of single occupancy trips on the network. And again, first mile, last mile connections. So we definitely recognize the overlap here with the mobility hub feasibility study that's kicking off shortly. So don't want to duplicate efforts, but really I see this effort as kind of putting some policy and framework in place so that when we have a mobility hub constructed in Bend, there are services that we have launched already or could launch quickly at that hub, like bike share or other scooter share systems. So any questions on that?
I'm not seeing any raised hands. Do you have any? Thank you for that, Casey. That was really informative. Do you have any other updates that you'd like to share?
Not necessarily. Yeah, I guess I can say from an OSU student perspective, I know our students would be looking forward to having some kind of shared scooters or bikes back on the streets. So ultimately trying to work towards that as a short-term goal. But we haven't been able to launch anything new here. I'm just excited to see students back on campus and somewhat driving that demand and that need to continually innovate and provide better options that keep them from driving alone places and to our campus. And then I'll end with a thanks again to Henry and the BPRD team with the nice Hall Road Trail improvements, because we have a lot of students walking that half mile between our two buildings, and that new path is much better than what we had.
Thanks, Casey. And Dave, I just texted the project manager who's actually on site with the contractor at Mammoth Drive. So they're going to look at the asphalt today.
Okay, cool.
Great. Thank you, Casey. And Andrea, do you want to give just a quick update on the status of our federal COVID relief funding?
Yeah, so this summer, I think it was this summer, it might have been late spring, we were made aware that the MPO would be receiving 1.5 million in COVID Relief Act funds with no requirements attached. So no match required, no restrictions on how the funds could be used. With direction from our board, we met with city, county, Park and Rec, CET, and ODOT to try and get some ideas of what they might have for priority projects for use of these dollars. They all gave us some various ideas, but what we found was that there were multiple mentions across agencies for the North Corridor bike ped undercrossing projects and funds needed for that. So we relayed that information to our chair and vice chair because that project was going to be undergoing a feasibility study. So Rory Rowan from the city came to our policy board meeting last month and gave our board an update of what that feasibility study was, timing especially. And now we need to bring this topic back to our board to see how they want to move forward. So in other words, do they want to wait for the results of the feasibility study for this North Corridor bike ped undercrossing project, or do they want to consider other projects? So that's where that's at.
Thank you. I just want to share something. I'm not going to have time to jump into it, but just get rid of this. I'm gonna forward a copy of this to everybody after the meeting, but this is a presentation that ODOT staff has put together, and they're just starting to show this around the state. They presented it at the Central Oregon Area Commission on Transportation meeting last week. They're going to share it with the MPO policy board here in a couple of weeks. And it's a presentation about the potential for this new infrastructure funding bill that's being debated this week and could get approval this week. I was just going to point out a couple of things in it that this bill, which I didn't know until recently, it's actually a combination of extending a new 5-year extension of the surface transportation bill, but also includes, essentially one-time funding for some new infrastructure funding. And why I wanted to share it is that ODOT has, based on what's out there today, they've done some analysis of the numbers, and the funding that would be coming in through this is significant to Oregon. You can see on this slide, that ODOT would be looking at, so highways and special programs, that's highways, bridges, safety, bike ped projects, trail projects, looking at a 38% increase in funding over the next 5 years. And then public transportation would see a 35% increase. So those are some major new amounts of funding. A lot of those dollars will get pushed out into existing programs. So a certain percentage will get divvied out to pavement preservation, bridge work, that type of thing. But there's a fair amount of discretionary funding, is my understanding. And so what ODOT is wanting from cities and counties, and others, with the discretionary funding that they have, how should they allocate those dollars? And I don't have a lot of information beyond that at this point, but what I think I'll do is reserve some time on the December agenda to kind of dig into this a little bit deeper, because I'd like to have the MPO TAC, members of the TAC give us some ideas, and then ultimately have the MPO board, submit a comment letter up to the Oregon Transportation Commission. I'm just going to skip through a couple slides here. So there's quite a bit of money would be available for electric vehicle charging stations. There's going to be a lot of new money for resiliency projects related to climate change. Significant, huge new infusion of funding for bridge work across the state, safety work, active transportation projects. And then the biggie, I think for us, is there's going to be a lot of new money getting pushed out through the local programs, the various local programs, which are quite a few different things. And so this slide here just summarizes how they think those dollars would get pushed out. So there's going to be a big scramble, particularly this next spring, I think, to get the first, assuming this thing is approved, to get these first year's worth of funding programmed to projects. So like I said, we're out of time. And so I'll send a copy of this to you with some of my notes, and then we will dedicate some time next month to talk about this. I guess, any questions of anyone?
Another, I might just note, I think the comment was made in the presentation to COAC that at least part of this money could end up being fast. In other words, here's the money,
Yes.
but you got to spend it soon. So people that are engaged are going to want to be ready for that.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think the number that he threw out was at upwards of $100 million. There'd be almost, I think, upwards of $100 million would need to be programmed next spring essentially. And so that's a huge amount of funding to determine how to spend it that quickly and get it moving through the process. Andrea?
Given the speed of it, I assume none of the projects have to be written in an adopted plan.
Good question. We don't know that yet. All right. Well, we are out of time. Our next TAC meeting is scheduled for December 1st at 10 a.m. Like I said, I think I'll see if I can get hopefully I'll have a updated version of this with some more detail by that time that we can share and then get some feedback from you all. And with that, unless there's any questions, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.